All
right, well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening on this nice and warm, very warm summer August evening. I am glad to be back. I was not able to make it last month, so I appreciate that Gale was able to run things without me, and I think Rick Wise assisted with some of the co-host responsibilities. So thank you for your help there and covering for me last month. We are down to the last couple of sessions in our series. So after this month, we have one more month before we close out the series. So if you've been with us the entire time, we appreciate you being with us throughout all of the several months worth of meetings that we've done. If this is your first time, welcome. We're glad to have you. Everybody that has registered and or is a member of the Brentwood Photography Group, you will have access to all of the recordings, whether you attended 0 sessions or all of the sessions. We'll make those links available to you and have been making the link available to you on our private YouTube page. You're welcome to view those at any time. We will keep that up forever until YouTube goes out of business. So that's probably going to be a little while. With that being said, tonight we are going to hear from Gale about intro to sports photography. But before I kick this off, I'm going to put a link in the chat window. And also, this will be a good time to remind you that I will be watching the chat window. So if you have questions, feel free to use the chat window or just to speak up when the time is appropriate. But just wanted to invite you all to our next monthly meeting of the Brentwood Photography Group. That will be the first Tuesday of the month in September. And we are going to do a online only option. We actually have our guest speaker is going to be online, but the registration is available on our homepage. So I'm going to go ahead and put that link here in the chat window. So BrentwoodPhotographyGroup.org. You can go there. You can see details on Tim Gray, who's going to be our next speaker, and he's going to talk to us about an application that some of you or many of you may have heard about called Photo Pills. He's going to do a presentation that's going to help us get a better feel for how to use something like Photo Pills to plan your next photography outing. It can be a very valuable tool. And so this is a free session that's open to anyone. So again, if you go to our homepage, you can see more details about that session. And at the very bottom, there'll be a link that says register. And that will just take you to a Google Doc where you're going to fill out your name and email address. And they will send you a link to the meeting sometime shortly before the presentation. And so again, we would like to invite you to kind of give you a taste of what it's like to be part of our group, even though we won't be in person. We'll still be doing some of our normal group business before the session actually starts. But the majority of that session will actually be Tim speaking. So welcome you to as an invitation to join us. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me or Gale. I'd be glad to fill you in. And as always, if you're interested in becoming a member, you can go to the homepage as well. And in the upper right-hand corner, there is a members section. And under that menu, there is a link to join the group. And so we are still, working out the return on COVID. We actually did meet in person this last month. And unfortunately, it looks right now like we're probably not going to meet in person for the month of September because of the increase in numbers, the rapid increase in the COVID numbers. But again, since we have a speaker online, it makes it easy for us to make that decision anyway. Other than that, I think we're ready to turn this over to Gale. So I will be quiet and let Gale get started.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Jeremy. Let me go ahead and hit the screen share. And let's see, where did it go? Hang on just a second. Okay. Okay. There we go. Okay. All right. So this is, well, let me back up. I was asked not too long ago, what do you photograph or what do you enjoy photographing? And of course, I usually say I like to photograph anything and everything, anything that catches my interest. But if I go back and look at what really gets me excited about photography, and I've been at it for a while, it really comes down to number one. I think my number one passion is to do landscape, try to create. I love the challenge of creating fine art landscape shots, and try to take advantage of any travels that I do. But the second is really is sports or action shots. And I think it's because, again, of the challenge of trying to capture that moment in time, or to catch that brief fraction of a second that tells a story. And it doesn't always have to be certainly just about sports. It can be well, it can be just about anything where there's movement. It can be family events. This happens to be a reception, a wedding that I had shot several years ago, probably about 7, 8 years ago. And I think this was my next to my last wedding that I did. And I don't do weddings anymore. I finally realized that's just not my thing. Too long of a day for the benefits. And so, but this was at a reception. And what I liked about this was, again, and you'll hear me say this again, is I think the story is usually when you can see motion, but you also see the person's face. And this young girl here, obviously having a great time, and she had been spinning around and dancing for about a minute or so, and got my attention, and so yeah, I had to get that shot. And again, the challenge is, how do you catch a shot like this when you have that person in that position, when they're spinning around, moving fast. And so, and I would also mention the young boy in the background. I didn't catch him walking through the scene. He was actually doing the robot. And so that kind of almost was kind of a secondary story to the whole thing. But also what you'll notice, I'll mention this now, on I think every photograph that I show tonight, you'll see the lens that I use, the focal length that was used, along with the aperture and the shutter speed and the ISO. So, for those of you that really like to know the details, how did I shoot it, or what was used to shoot it, that'll be on all the pictures. So again, family events, family gatherings. This is one of my grandsons. A couple of years ago, he's kind of the daredevil kind of guy. Fortunately for me, as a photographer. And when I asked him, he said, well, I'm going to do some tumbling. And so I said, hey, let me grab my camera. And so we shot, he did this for maybe about 10 minutes for me. And so again, you can see what 1600ths of a second definitely froze him in motion. So we captured everything. You can see the face a little bit, certainly his profile, but you can see that he's looking at the water. And I think just having that much of his facial expression, again, I think adds to it. And again, he did several of these for me. So freezing the action in sports or action shots is very, very important. I know some people will and one technique for action shots is to deliberately slow the shutter down and to deliberately get a blur of the action. A lot of times I've seen a lot of images of traffic in the evenings, and you see the long streaks of the headlights and the taillights on the highway. And that's a great technique. Another technique, which I don't have any illustrations of that tonight, but actually panning the subject. That's, if you have somebody running past you, or they're on a bicycle, running past you, and you keep the camera on them, and you're moving with them, that's going to give you a streak in the background. And so that's one technique. Again, I don't have anything to show you for that tonight, but I just think it's really what we're going to be looking at here is just what was the shutter speed. We're going to talk a little bit about composition. That still is in play when you shoot action. I was fortunate to get a project with our local Rutherford County Chamber of Commerce last year, and one of the projects in this year-long project was they wanted me to shoot a live performance at one of the venues just outside of Murfreesboro here. And that was my first time to shoot a live performance, a stage performance. And it was fun. It was challenging. I spent more time trying to figure out how to deal with the lighting, the stage lighting, and so on. But finally, I figured that out. But you can see here with this performer, I was able to capture her expression. And again, that was only at 250th of a second. And the aperture was fairly wide open. What little you can see of the rest of the band in the background certainly is blurred out. And my style of photography and action shots is exactly that. I want backgrounds blurred out. It can be just simple events like this. This was the third time they fired the cannon. First time we weren't even couldn't even see it. We had an opportunity to go, oh, I don't know what that was, but something's going on, and we joined the crowd and looked off over the balcony and was watching them. And they shot the second time. This was the third one, and so I was able to. Fortunately, I was able to time it fairly good by listening to the command of the reenactment soldiers when they were given the command to fire. So something, again, as simple as this, and I probably need to move that down a little bit, is that one was done at 25th of a second. In reality, this was almost dark, and you could see the ISO. I had that cranked up fairly high, and again, still was able to capture the smoke, which is going to be rather soft around the edges anyway. So the slower shutter speed didn't really matter. Shooting wildlife. I'm not a wildlife photographer unless it's a real convenience. I don't go out. I've got a friend of mine that is out almost every day trying to photograph some of the birds in the area along our greenway that we have here in Murfreesboro. And he's got some great shots, but that's just not the thing that makes me get up early in the morning. But we were at a location. This was actually at Real Foot Lake. So anybody who's ever spent any time there, there's egrets everywhere. And so the opportunities it was very easy to get shots of them. This one I shot. This was probably about, and I'm guessing, this was probably about the 7th or 8th frame in the burst that I was shooting to capture this. And I picked this one because the bird was had the dark background. So we had a nice contrast between the dark background and the white and gray of the bird. I think it would have been a little bit, well, I know it would be different because I had those where the blue sky was behind the bird, and it just didn't have the same impact. And again, shooting this one at 2000s and a fairly low ISO. I had an opportunity to go to photograph a rodeo. This is the first time I'd photographed a rodeo, and I can't wait for the next one to come in the area. It was fantastic. This happened to be up in British Columbia, and it wasn't the big Stampede rodeo. that they have in Calgary. But this was a town up in the hills, and we were at the restaurant, and somebody said, hey, there's a rodeo about an hour and a half away from here, and it's all professional riders, and so it is a pro rodeo, but it's not huge. And so anyway, I said, gee, never photographed a rodeo. Let's go do that. And it was really exciting. And I was actually on the about the railing was about I'd say maybe 6 feet above the ground level, and I was in the second row in the bleachers. And fortunately, from that perspective, it almost looks like I'm at the ground level, which would be ideal. And but there was just so much action, and so many stories that were being told by the connection of the animals and the riders and the calf ropers and all of those. It was just a great opportunity to try to maybe hone the skills a little bit on getting action shots. There was a photographer's pit or area that was to the right of where I was shooting from. And so they would be shooting straight on to the horse and the rider. And of course, they were at ground level, shooting between the rails of the fence. And I thought, man, they've got a great spot. Actually, I think I got just as good a shots from where I was seated there, because after about the fourth bronc rider, the horses it was almost like that was their routine. They'd come out of the chute, they started bucking, but they would work their way right across in front of us. And so it was just a matter of just waiting for the next rider and the next horse. Camera settings. If you're gonna capture motion, if you're being able to work in whatever type of lighting you're in, whether it's a daytime like the rodeo and the bird photography, or if it's at nighttime, maybe it's maybe it's your kid or your grandkids playing a sport, and it's at night. You've got all these different challenges, and so having a working familiarity with your camera settings is extremely important. And we'll go over each one of these. The aperture, obviously, and shutter speed and ISO, those are the three things that we always talk about in how to get the better pictures rather than getting off of auto or the program setting on your camera. And so again, you need to, we won't spend the time tonight to talk about the relationship between those first three. I'm assuming most of you have a good working knowledge of that. But in addition, we're talking about focus mode and burst mode and JPEG versus RAW. And we'll cover each one of these. But really what I'm suggesting here is be familiar with the different types of focus modes that your camera gives you, or the options that you have. Know how to put your shutter on the burst mode, and so you're shooting frames in rapid succession. If you can shoot an action shot like that rider on the bronc, if you can shoot that in one shot, you're good. A whole lot better than I am. So I definitely rely on the burst mode on my camera when I'm shooting action. And so now we've got the debate of JPEG versus RAW. And I'll just spend a very short amount of time here. One of the reasons why usually, and I'm just saying usually, when I'm photographing landscape or still life or portrait, etc., I'm shooting in RAW. I mean, that's just the go-to. However, when I'm shooting action, or particularly sports, I will go to JPEG. And the reason I go to JPEG, even though I'm losing some of my latitude in adjustments, post-processing, if I can get my camera set correctly with aperture and shutter ISO, then I will use JPEG. And it's mainly because at some point in shooting RAW, because of the size of your file, you will find your camera suddenly stopping and buffering. It's trying to load all your pictures onto your memory card. And so, so if you're taking maybe 15, 20 shots consecutively and you're in RAW, well, number one, I don't think you could probably shoot that many in RAW, depending on your camera. But at some point, you're going to start seeing a little light on the back of your camera flashing. And it's simply saying, hey, I'm trying to get all that information on the memory card. So give me a minute. So that's why I would shoot in JPEG. JPEG, it's almost unlimited on my camera. In fact, the manual even says, I forget how many thousands of shots I can take just by holding the shutter button down in JPEG. And so that's why for action shot sports, particularly, I'm shooting JPEG. Let me stop here and see if there's any questions at this point about, again, I'm going to talk a little more about focus mode and burst mode, but any questions on anything that I may have touched on up till now?
Gale, there was just one question about the picture of the egret and the fact that you used you had a high shutter speed. The question was, do you do freehand or tripod? And I went ahead and answered this in the chat, but maybe you can elaborate some. I said, you can shoot it at 1/2000th of a shutter speed freehand and get some sharp pictures. The thing is when you're shooting wildlife, you may not want to leave it to chance. So you'll see a lot of photographers that are doing wildlife photography will want to use a tripod as much as possible just to not leave anything up to chance.
Yeah, actually, yeah, very, very true. In fact, I'll mention toward the end that when I'm shooting sports, I'm oftentimes on a monopod. So I have the stability of the monopod, particularly when I'm using my long lens. But that is a good question. But the birds pictures of the rodeo, that was all handheld. And I would say I don't shoot in the image stabilization. I will turn image stabilization off when I'm shooting sports because I've had some lenses when I have image stabilization on, it seems that it's more difficult for us certain lenses to lock in on the focus. And so I always take image stabilization off, either if it's off the lens or if it's off the in the body stabilization. But yeah, at 2,000ths of a second or 1/1600ths of a second, if you have to go handheld, that's usually not a big deal. I just know you get a more sense of security if you're on a tripod, obviously. Very good question. On the aperture, I'm trying to shoot action shots with the wide open. And that's mainly because I want all of the attention on the subject, whether it be a bird or whether it be a rider on a horse, or if it's a player in a game, whatever it is. I want the fans in the background to be blurred out as best we can, and so I'm gonna shoot. I've got two prime lenses that are f2, and I'm going all the way open on those for two reasons. One is if I'm shooting in a gymnasium, and the gymnasium I shoot in all the time, the lighting in there, I think most schools, most high schools, the lighting is not great. And so f2 gives me a good shutter speed without having to go extreme on ISO. And then of course outdoors, I've got a zoom that lets me go down to 2.8, and then I also have my long lens, my 100 to 400. When I'm zoomed all the way at 400, I'm at 5.6. So I'm again the whole exercise here is shooting wide open. And usually, and you can be wide open at F2 and not worry about, well, part of their jersey is going to be in focus, but their face may not be. Well, usually you're not that close to the action or the players, so that's shouldn't be an issue. Let me stop here and say this too. When I start showing some of my sports pictures, I do shoot for a local high school here in Murfreesboro. And I do two things. One is I take the pictures. I guess I'm the official sports photographer, and the school gets my selected pictures for the yearbook. So that's my courtesy to the school. One of my daughters graduated from there, and one of my other daughters was in charge of the yearbook, 15 years ago. And so that's how it got started. And the yearbook person has changed hands about 3 or 4 times, but I'm still giving them pictures. Secondly, the selected pictures are going on my website, and that's for parents to purchase. And so, there's some revenue generated from that. And so that's why when I talk about photographing in a gym, that's the gym that I know really, really well. Okay. For example, we're talking about shallow depth of field. This one, I'm zoomed all the way to 400 millimeter, which is 5.6 aperture. That's as wide as it will go on that lens. And at 800ths of a second, I've frozen the player, and I have a blurred background. The coach with the black windbreaker on, and the players on the bench, had they been in focus, it would have been easy for the eye to move to them to see what was going on back there, and taking the eye away from the player. And this player, number 1, that was the subject. And again, 800ths of a second, was able to freeze it. The ball is a little bit blurred. That doesn't bother me. I don't mind the ball to be blurred. That just tells me it's in motion. But I do want the player to freeze their action. In basketball, of course, in the gym, again, this is my F2, one of my 2 primes that I use in the gym. And I would say this: I've had people say, "Well, what lens are you using for basketball in the gym?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm shooting either a 35 f2 or I'm shooting my 50 millimeter prime." And they, "Well, gee, don't you have to have a greater focal length to capture the action?" Depending on when I'm photographing for this team here that's in the white, depending on which end of the court they're playing offense, I just simply go to the other end and shoot there. And 50 millimeter is fine for me. Now I'm on a crop sensor, so if you look at 50 millimeter, you're really looking at about 75 millimeter, almost 80 millimeters. Which is considered to be really, really good for portrait work, and I find it very conducive to sports. So the 50 millimeter, surprisingly, works really well for me with basketball, and I've used my 35 prime also. And some have talked about it, and I'll mention this again, but some folks talk about the ISO is, well, gee whiz, this ISO is at 2500. If we blow this up 400, magnification of 400, you're going to see noise. This is not going on a billboard. This is going in a yearbook. And so it's noise is not even an issue. So I've kind of gotten over that. Again, this bird here, I got him at 600ths of a second, and at 5.6. So I've got blurred background. And I would just mention the picture of the egret before, the white bird with the dark background, and this one, these were all shot from a boat. my wife, we were on a tour of Real Foot Lake, and we were just kind of putt-putting along, and our guide was, we were on a little flat bottom boat. So again, moving, a moving platform and a moving subject. And again, if you got a high enough shutter speed, you can still freeze it. And then we talk about shutter speed. If I'm photographing young kids, like somebody at age for T-ball, the little guys and gals, I usually start off, and that's really what I want to emphasize here, is I'll start at about 250th of a second. And sometimes I can even go a little slower on the shutter speed. The little ones aren't moving as fast. They may seem like it, but they're not quite moving as fast as high school or college athletes. And so when I'm shooting middle school, let's say basketball, I can get by with about 600ths of a second. High school, whether it be a sophomore, senior, then I'm pushing it up about 1,000, maybe 1,200ths of a second. And the distance you are from that subject, it impacts the shutter speed that you might need. The further away the play is, the slower shutter speed you can get by with. It's when they're really up close to you, that's where you're really seeing all the motion. But if they're at the other end of the court, you can get by, if you had to, you can get by with a slower shutter speed. If you are into sports, you've got kids or grandkids into the sports, number one, for me, it was very beneficial to know the sport, to know what to anticipate. If it's, if I've got a runner on first and second, maybe I'm shooting the girls softball, a runner on first and second, and there's one out, then and it's a ground ball, I'm expecting that ball goes to the third base to get the force out. It doesn't always happen, but that's so. If you know the sport, you can begin to start thinking, okay, based on the situation right now, where possibly is the ball going to go, or where is the player going to go? Also, knowing the players. Every year when I'm shooting for the school, there's always one or two or three new players, and it takes me a while to figure out, okay, what is their style, how fast they are, how quick, what position are they playing, and start figuring them out. Obviously, for the school, I have to get at least, so I usually try to get a dozen pictures of each player, so that nobody's been left out. Even the ones sitting on the bench, I'm taking pictures of them sitting on the bench if they've never had a chance to get on the court. So know the players, and you can begin to start anticipating what the play may be. And in this practicing my timing, I know we've got volleyball starting up in about a week. And from past experience, and I've been doing this with this school now, again, for about 15 years. And I know it's going to take me at least one game of volleyball to get my timing back. I typically will find the first half of the first game of the season, I'm like 3 frames after the action. And it's just, just getting the brain and the shutter finger to start working together again. And so again, it might take a little bit of practice. And I shoot with both eyes open. I had a sports photographer tell me that one time, and I thought, well, I don't understand that. I'm not going to look at the live view on the back of the camera to be shooting. And but if I keep both eyes open, my left eye is looking through the viewfinder. My right eye, I'm using that for my peripheral vision, and I can still see some of the things that are going on, even though I'm focused on a particular player or an area. I can see when the pitcher is going to throw the ball and start anticipating. It took me a while to get that down to where I felt comfortable with that, but it does work. Again, anticipation. I saw this, the player in the blue was a visiting team, but he had stole second base. And it wasn't a pass ball by the catcher or anything. I mean, he was just fast. And then as soon as the next pitch, the catcher did drop the ball, fumbled it, and I knew this guy was going to take off. And so I was already focused in on our third baseman to try to make the tag. So again, it's just anticipation. Same way with number 4. I think he's already graduated, but last year I knew that he always comes up on the left side of the court. He either makes the shot or he passes it to number 20. So I know him well enough to know what he probably is going to do. This guy here, I almost deleted this one when I got it, but then because I thought, well, the umpire is in the way. But I think the umpire actually adds to the picture. I mean, it's just my preference, and maybe you would disagree with that one. But again, this guy's on first, and I remember the catcher, the ball had gone behind the catcher, and I saw him taking off, and I followed him. I had the camera on him and the shutter going from the time he took off from first all the way to a second. He was able to stand up when he got to second, so there was no sliding. So this one I liked a little bit better. And again, anticipation on this one, bases were loaded. And I knew if it was a ground ball, they're going to go to home. And that's what they did. So I was already locked in on them. Repetition. Have never been to one of these events before. And my daughter's son-in-law invited us to go to this over in North Carolina. And I thought, well, this is kind of exciting. Maybe I better take my camera. And this was the first hurdle or first jump on the course. And after I saw 2 or 3 horses, they were going through the practice, and thought, okay, that's gonna be my shot. And so I'd already composed, had it already locked in, and I forget how many. I think it was maybe about 20, maybe 25 horses in competition. And shot a lot of them going over the first hurdle. And again, the expression of the rider, and I think the expression of the horse. I think the horse is going, hey, we're going to do this. And not changing my seating position in the stadium. All I had to do was just swing a little bit from the right on that first hurdle and just swing back straight ahead to this shot, and got all these shots. And again, this was just 8/100ths of a second. And again, 6400 ISO. And then zooming in more, I definitely wanted the rider's face, and I wanted to see the strength of the horse. With sports, if there is a ball in sports, I'm not even going to try to think if there is one without a ball. But if there is, I think the ball and the player's face need to be in the picture. And so, for example, I mean, here's the story here. They have just kicked the ball. So you've got a little bit of blur on the ball. And so we know what's happening. But if we have that same shot without the ball, okay, now we don't know, okay, is the ball coming to them? What have they done with it? Where is it? And so it makes a big difference. So I have a lot of rejects in my photos after a game, a lot of rejects. Again, another example of, pull this down a little bit. Another example of the ball in action with the expression of the left fielder. And without the ball, we're not seeing much. We're not sure where's the ball at? How close? Does she have any chance of catching it? So again, if I don't have the ball in play, I generally reject the picture. Using autofocus. and I rely primarily on well, I do always use autofocus when I'm shooting sports. And you need to know what your autofocus modes are. We'll talk about that. Tracking versus single focus point. I started off trying to use tracking on my camera. Tracking, I can select to where I have maybe 9 focus points in the center of my composition. And so the theory being that those 9 are going to lock in on the main subject and stay on them because there's so many focus points. And sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't work. And so there's tracking versus single focus point. And I'll just say, I don't do the tracking anymore. I just use a single focus point. So the tracking mode, for example, and again, I've simulated the focus points. So it's not exactly what I would see on my camera, but pretty close. But most of the focus points are on the player, but you've got one. You've got 3 in the background, 1 by her elbow on the background, 1 above her head on the background, and 1 on the net. And if you've ever done this type of tracking, you'll know that those focus points will blink. They'll go in and out, in and out. And if they lock in on something that's not your subject, you've missed. You probably have missed the focus. Same way here. We've got most focus points are on the player. We've got 1 by her wrist in the background and 1 by her right arm. And I've just gotten to where I just don't want to. I don't want to chance it. Same way here. And this one, again, I simulated this, but I would be concerned that the camera might want to lock in on that red flag. Autofocusing is on cameras is based on contrast, and it could very likely want to get focused on the flag and not the player. I'll do single focus and we'll ask for questions. And so again, when I'm doing single focus, I'm putting it on the mass of the body of the player. I'm putting it on their midsection, on their chest. And again, I don't worry about the front of the uniform in focus and their face not be, even at f2. That's never been an issue. Is it more difficult to do single focus? Well, you've got to track it pretty close or very close. You've got to, again, kind of anticipating the direction they're going to be going. And you can see on these, you can see where my focus points are at. Okay, questions?
Yeah, we've got a handful of them in the chat. So the first one was, are there times when you use manual focus, or maybe you would suggest using manual focus for sports photography anyway?
Yes, one time that I will use it on occasion if I feel I need to, and that would be if I'm shooting a baseball or softball game, for example, and I'm shooting through the chain link fence. I've positioned myself behind the home plate, but obviously I'm not on the field there, and so I will go in and lock in on manual on the pitcher. And now when I do that, I'm probably going to have a little bit more depth of field in my aperture. So when they throw the ball, they're moving, maybe a foot or 2 closer to the home plate. And so you've got to, kind of compensate for that. But that would be one way. If not, you can run into the problem of when you put your lens up near the chain link, it's trying to focus on the chain link, which is too close to the lens, and all you're getting is a zoom, zoom, zoom back and forth, and you run into some problems.
Right. The next question actually asks about polo, which is our outing scheduled for the 20th are going to be at the Franklin Polo match. And interestingly, that came up right about the time you had some horse pictures up there.
I love it. I love it. I would just say, and is this going to be day or night or both?
It'll start at 6 o'clock, so it'll start out in daylight, but it'll definitely finish in dark.
Okay.
And I can say that the lights aren't great. They're typically what you would expect around that sort of a scenario.
Okay. Yeah, just again, go with the widest aperture your lens will allow. You don't have to now, and I've never been to a polo match, so I'm kind of blind on this, but I would anticipate that I would not always be zooming out at 400 millimeter if I had a lens. If I have my lens that'll do that, I may not always be at that. I've got a lens that's 50 to 140 millimeter, and it's a fixed 2.8. For me, that's probably the lens I'd be taking. So at nighttime, I can go to 2.8 and rely on a high ISO after it gets dark, and then do some cropping. A lot of the things you're seeing that I'm showing here, there has been a certain amount of cropping in each and every one of those. Because when I'm shooting sports, I want to give them plenty of latitude within the frame. If I'm too tight on them, they can make a sudden movement and suddenly be out half of them out of my frame, and then I've lost the shot. So I do give some latitude.
I've shot polo a number of times, and I also shoot with that 50 to 140 lens. So Gale and I both shoot Fuji, which is a crop sensor camera. If you have a higher end camera that might be a full frame sensor, then you're looking at a 70 to 200 millimeter lens would be the equivalent of that.
Yeah.
So that one, Bobby, there'll be lots of opportunities for some distant shots, but there very well could be some stuff that you get up close, because you can stand up pretty close to the boards and have the horses right there up close to you too. So you get a variety of opportunities throughout the evening.
Well, that's going to be exciting. This
Yeah.
is good timing for this course.
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
The next question was, if you could pick two lenses for action sport shooting, which would that be? Which two would that be? So we actually just kind of answered that. I know the 50 to 140 is one of your big go-to lenses. And I noticed also, you mentioned this earlier too, but a lot of the settings that you displayed on your images were either the 50 or the 35 millimeter. So if you had to choose between one of those two as your second pick, would you have a preference?
Yeah, I would probably go with the as a preference. I'd go with the 35 millimeter prime for indoor. If I'm shooting sports, again, if it's basketball, volleyball, something like that. Because again, my experience is a lot of gymnasiums, high school gymnasiums are poorly lit. So I would try to go with. So I'm very happy with my prime 35. It gives, again, that gives me a little more latitude. It gives me a little more space around the player. But again, I can do some cropping, and I don't worry about noise, even if I have to do some cropping. But for soccer, I'm going to, and for baseball, for soccer and baseball, I oftentimes will have my soccer for sure. I have my 100 to 400 millimeter, and because I'm not going to be running I'm not going to go from one end of the soccer field to the other constantly. I try to see, okay, which team is going to be more offensive and is scoring more. I tend to go to that end of the field, but again, I'll stay with soccer because a lot of things are happening on the far side of the field. I tried guessing where I needed to be, and I finally just found myself a spot where I stay, which I'm going to show that in a moment for each of these sports.
Yeah, the answer in soccer is always where you're not. So it's better just to stay and wait for it to come to you. It's too big
That's a
of a
great
field.
answer. That is a great answer. That's exactly right. Exactly right.
The next question is, which setting do you typically set? Are you typically doing shutter speed, or do you do ISO? We're talking about priority, so we're talking about shutter priority in many cases here, right?
Yeah, I'm going to be in. Again, I know what shutter speeds that I probably will need for the particular event or sport, whatever the game is. again, I know I need 800ths, maybe 1600ths of a second. And so I start with that as my goal. And then I will adjust the aperture to get me close to that. If the aperture doesn't, if going wide open on whatever lens I'm using still doesn't give me that ideal shutter speed, then I'm cranking up the ISO to give me that shutter speed. But that's really the three. I didn't really realize, you just made me realize that that's my process. Is I know what my ideal is. I go to that, and when I see it's too dark, then I open the aperture wide open, and then play with the ISO until I get the correct exposure at the ideal shutter speed.
And some of that too may be dependent on your surroundings, right? If you are in a bright lit day, then you don't necessarily have to think about as much. But if you have changing conditions, like we talked about with the polo match, where those conditions are going to go from light to dark in a fairly short amount of time, there's some things you may not want to mess with. You may be, if you get too caught up in messing with the settings, you miss the opportunity for that shot that you wished you would have captured.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I know I've got this bullet on a slide coming up, but when I'm shooting in the gymnasium that I shoot, the lighting is different from one end of the court to the other, just by the positioning of the overhead lights. And it's almost a one-stop difference in lighting. And when I'm shooting in the gym, I just go to auto ISO. Because I can't be fooling around trying to make adjustments and catching the action at the same time. And so again, the going auto ISO works well for me. So I don't have to be thinking about that, which end of the court am I photographing. And I would recommend.
Last question.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, there's a last question here. And I think the answer is no, but do you use back button focus?
I do not. I used to try to do that when, I used to try to do that when I did portrait. And I thought, well, this works pretty good. But then it's like, why am I doing that? So for me personally, I haven't found an advantage to that. But I know a lot of people who swear by it. And, if it works for you, great. I just happen to be one of those that I'm just comfortable with the shutter button to lock in for me. All right. Let's see. Setting the camera to continuous. Now on my Fuji, it is continuous focus. I think on the Canon that back in the day when I had a Canon system, I think they called it AI servo. I'm not sure what Nikon, maybe they call it continuous as well, but you've got to have that, obviously. Because if that player or the action is moving toward you or away from you, if you're on single focus, you're going to miss the shot. Whereas if you're on continuous, or whatever they call it for your camera, once you've got your focus on that player, whether they move toward you or away from you, the camera, the lens is going to stay locked in on focus. So that's a must. Absolutely a must. Let's see. Oh, and remember after the game, remember to reset your camera to single shot focus, because when you're on continuous, wherever that focus point is, that's what's going to be in focus. And I can't tell you how many times I've shot maybe a landscape, and I've got my focus point on the rock in the foreground, and then I move my camera to recompose. But suddenly that focus point moved off of the rock. It didn't stay locked on it. It's now on focus of where the focus point went to. And so that's, I almost had to write a note on my wrist to remind me of that. And how fast will your lens focus? When I knew that I wanted a 50 millimeter and 35 millimeter prime, and I think Fuji had a 50 millimeter 1.4. I think it was 1.4. And I thought this will be great for shooting in the gym. I mean, that's going to give me a lot of light with a low ISO. And so I went to lens rental over there in Brentwood, got the lens and used it for a week. Used it for about 3 games, and it was terrible. It was so slow focusing that I couldn't get it. I couldn't get the shot. I was missing more than half my shots just because it was too slow. It wouldn't lock in quick enough. And then I tried the 50 f2, certainly not letting as much light coming in, but it was so fast, so quick. And so that's why I gave up a little bit of the aperture, just because I needed something that would lock in immediately. And so that my 2 primes, well, all of my lenses are very fast on locking in on the focus. So before you go out, you just need to test it. How quickly will it lock? Will it focus and lock on? Burst mode. Again, I keep both eyes open for the action, and frames per second does matter. The Canon that I had, I think it was a Canon 5, what was it, 5D Mark II or Mark II 5D, something like that. Been a long time ago. It shot 4 frames a second. And so when I was trying to shoot action, I'm getting at 4 frames a second, I'm getting more like a, and I mean, that's not a lot of shots in that 1 second. A lot of things go on between each one of those shutters clicks. And then the camera that I have now, I get 14. So instead of now I'm getting a, now that's great because I'm going to catch the action. One of those frames in that burst is possibly going to be the keeper. The downside is you're going to have a whole lot of rejects. When I'm shooting, for example, if I shoot a 2 out of 3 volleyball game, I'm coming home with about 800 or 900 shots. And I load them on Lightroom. I start going through, and then the real work begins, having to go through all 800 or so. And for me, I out of 800 shots, on average, I'm probably coming out of there with about 20 keepers. So that's a whole lot of rejects. And so you just have to just know that that's part of the game. But you've got to have that. You've got to have a fast, frame rate in order to increase the chances of capturing the moment. I know that I typically am shooting about 8 frames. I know that from when I'm looking on Lightroom for a particular shot. And so out of those 8 frames, maybe one of those is a keeper. Oftentimes I don't have anything in that 8 that I want to keep. So that's a lot of throwaways. So again, when you're on burst, expect a lot of rejects. And if you don't do some deleting, you fill up hard drives real quick. This particular shot, again, this was at the same rodeo, and 3 thousandths of a second. After I got home, I looked on the computer and I saw, hey, I love this shot because I've got the expression of the rider. He could be thinking a lot of things right at this moment. And you can see the 3 thousandths of a second. And this was, when I went back through and counted, this was the 12th out of 17 frames that I shot on this rider. This particular picture here actually won the Best in Show here at the Burrow, Focus on the Burrow exhibit 2 years ago. So I'm kind of proud of that one. But I just, to me, that one, there was a shot there. Again, the horses, this was 6 out of 10 frames. So again, I've got, this was a 6-1, so I've got 9 frames that could be tossed. ISO, we talked about that again. I started with aperture, shutter speed, or shutter speed aperture, I guess really is what I should have said. I do go to auto ISO when need be. And again, I don't worry about high ISO or noise anymore. I used to, in landscape and portrait, yeah, okay, that's an issue. But in sports, all you got to do is get a Sports Illustrated magazine and look at some of the pictures in there. Extremely grainy, but at least they got the shot. If you look at this nighttime game, you can see the shutter speed I had. I don't know why I had the shutter speed that high, but that was 12,800 ISO. And that's a pretty clear picture. Again, you wouldn't put that up on a billboard at that high ISO, but for a yearbook or for I could print this up to a 17 by 22, and it's not going to be an issue at all. So don't be afraid of high ISOs. Most cameras can handle it very, very well. Again, 640th. Again, 1250. And if we were to blow this up and you look at the guitar, that would be tack sharp, even at 1250. And then shooting position. I'm going to go through this real quick, and then we'll wrap it up. When I'm shooting volleyball, now again, because I'm shooting for the school, they allow me to set on either the left or the right side of the scoring table. And so if our team is playing at the left end, or that's where I'm at, or I'm going to be on the right side of the net, and because it gives me that position gives me a nice perspective of the net, and I know we have some players that are going to be spiking the ball, and so that's my position. I'm also seated. I don't stand. I am seated. 10 years ago, I used to sit on the floor. Now I embarrass myself and how long it takes me to get back up on my feet. So I'm seated, and I think it still gives me a good perspective. Again, when they're on the right side of the net, I just move over there as well. For basketball, I position myself here for the players that are coming down the court toward me. And I will move over here to get some shots of those driving for the net. Such as this going for the net, and this guy coming down the court and turning toward the net. So those are my two positions there. Softball and baseball. Now I'm not that close to the foul line. I'm halfway between the fence and the foul line. Most of the umpires know me because I've been doing this for so many years. And so they allow me on the field. If it's T-ball, something like that, that's no big deal. They don't mind if you're out there with a camera. High school, I had to get permission from the coach, number one, and then they endorsed me and convinced the umpires I wouldn't be in the way. And so I've been doing that for many, many years. And so I shoot from both the left field side and the right field side. Shooting from the left, I like the finish of a swing on the batter. I don't like I shoot halfway through the swing and so on, but I like the finish. And this is a classic example of what I look for. I want the finished swing, and I want the eyes of the batter on the ball. And that's what I've got here. And again, that's standing. I got my 100 to 400 on this one. And I'm standing just past the third base. Third base side also lets me catch runners rounding second. Did a lot of nice action shots in this position. This is shooting from the right field side. And again, left-handed batter. I've got the finish of the swing. And again, we talked about having the ball and the face in here. Obviously, the ball's already gone somewhere. But we've got we've got a determined runner right here, and that's what I was looking for. First base side also lets me, if we've got somebody, if there's some action on first base. This guy was thinking of stealing, had a long lead off, and the pitcher was trying to pick him off. Only after about 2 days of looking at my pictures did I actually recognize that the ball, I got the ball in midair. Didn't even see it for a couple of days. If we were to blow this up, you could actually see the stitching on the ball. And which was easy to do at 44 hundredths of a second. If it's soccer, I know very, very little about soccer other than they play a long time. I mean, I didn't have any kids that played soccer. I don't even think soccer was a sport when I was in school. But when I'm on the shooting soccer, I'm going to be parallel to the net of our goalie. And then I'm also going to be in this position as the players are coming down the field. So again, the goalie from that one position, and then as they're coming down the field. Now my 100 to 400, they can get too close. That's why if you look at a professional sport and professional sports photographers, they usually got at least 2 cameras around their neck. And that's why, so they can switch from one lens to the other. Shooting through the fence, we talked about this earlier. A lot of times what I typically will do is I'm going to get, I usually kneel down behind the chain link fence, get in position just off to the off center of the catcher and the umpire. And then I'm putting my lens right up against the chain link so that little opening, I'm not catching any of the fence itself. Now here's the big tip. Make sure you use the lens hood. All you have to do is have that lens, that glass right up against the chain link, and let them do a foul tip against the chain link, and there's a risk of damage to the glass on your lens. So I'm going to be, I use the lens hood. I'm very careful about that. But it gives me a very unique position on the picture. Only thing not good about this is the background. But again, some things you just can't control. Okay, man, boy. Okay, we're running behind. Young players, I shoot low. If it's a T-baller, I will sit on the ground. I want players running into the frame, or I want them in the center. I don't want them running out of the frame. And of course, I'm going to crop to get the best results. And you've heard me say it more than once. I want the face and the ball in play. I guess when you hit a volleyball legally, your arms are together. So I'm never going to get this player's face if the ball's ever over on this side. But interesting shot. Again, face and ball. And this guy, number 11, I think he is, every time he goes up to the net, he always has a interesting look on his face. So I'm always ready for him. Running into the center of the frame, facing into the center, still a little bit off center. Again, running in the center of the frame. If he was all the way over to the left edge, we've lost the impact of the picture. And then lastly, again, my camera, 14 frames a second. The lenses that I use, monopod, and again, going back to JPEG, I've started using, had an individual give me a tip on using fast memory cards. I should know, I should have looked it up before tonight. I don't know what the MB/S, I know it's MB something for seconds, I guess. But I had some memory cards that were like 92 MB/S, and they would buffer fairly quickly. 300 This is a very fast memory card and it never buffers on me.
It's megabits per second.
Megabits, thank you. Okay, I should write that down.
I'm
Okay,
the IT nerd.
as always, we've run about 10 minutes over. That's almost my mode, I guess. But any last minute questions? I'll hang around as long as you'd like.
Yeah, sure. There was one final question in the chat, and I talked about this a little bit in the chat too. But back when you're talking about the concerns around high ISO and the noise that's created, there's some really good tools out there now that can actually do some noise removal. I mean, if you've got Lightroom and Photoshop, you can do some pretty decent noise removal in there. But some really powerful tools that are popular with our group are Topaz. I think it's called Topaz Denoise.
Yeah, Topaz
Yeah.
Denoise. Yeah, I use
And
that.
Luminar. Luminar are the two that the Topaz and Luminar are the two that I've heard most commonly amongst members of our group.
Yeah, I started using Topaz Denoise. There was somebody that actually did a program, I think for our group. Can't remember who the guest speaker was, but he had talked about that, and I bought the trial, or I got the trial, and it was amazing what that would do. And so yeah, if I get into a situation where I think the noise is an issue, then I take it into Topaz, and it works great. Anything else?
Nothing else in the chat.
Okay. Well, hopefully, again, as always, I hope you got something out of it. Maybe you got a tip or two. If you're going to the polo games, maybe you can practice some of the things we talked about this evening, and just have fun with it. To me, it's exciting to see the picture when you get it back on the computer, and you see that that one frozen moment of the play or the action, and just can be a lot of fun. You want to go pro? It's the most expensive form of photography. If you're going to go to the pro level, you're talking about those 300, 600 millimeter primes. That I think you have to have a truck to haul the lens in and mount it on the camera and stuff. But it's very easy to spend $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 on a lens just for sport. So it is a very big investment if you're going to go that route. I'm very happy at the high school level.
All right. Well, I don't think we have any other questions. So as always, Gale, thank you for your time and for the opportunity to learn from you and see some of your images. And I already see some people in the chat saying I've got some opportunities coming up to be able to utilize what I've learned. So this is very timely. Like we mentioned, we've got the polo match coming up in a couple of weeks. I saw football season, of course, is getting ready to start. So lots of opportunities, and basketball season will be here before you know it too. So get out and shoot, take what you've learned tonight from Gale and put it into practice, and have a lot of fun, like you said. And so with that, we'll close out this evening. We'll see you again next month for our last session of this year's Photography Basics class. Everybody have a good evening.
Thank you, folks. Bye.